Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking my Democratic co-lead, Congressman Kilmer, and Senators Todd Young and Brian Schatz for their companion legislation in the Senate. We've worked hard to get this bill to the place it is today. I'd also like to thank Chairman McHenry for putting this bill on the markup schedule and for the co-sponsors of this legislation on this committee, as well as our subcommittee chairman. As of today, the bill has 44 total co-sponsors and 14 bipartisan co-sponsors on the Financial Services Committee, with 8 Republicans and 6 Democrats. The reason this bill is so bipartisan is that it's a measured response to a problem we're seeing across America. Housing costs are rising, and they are rising in large part because housing supply is not keeping up with demand. One of the drivers of this problem can be zoning and land use regulations. These can take many forms, but common examples are minimum lot sizes, restrictions on multifamily zoning, parking requirements, or restrictions on manufactured housing. When taken together, these policies can seriously restrict housing supply in a specific community, and when these policies become the norm across multiple communities or even across a state, those costs rise farther. The Yes in My Backyard Act requires state and local governments that receive CDBG block grant funding to report on barriers to housing in their jurisdictions and identify ways to promote reform. To be clear, this is not about having the federal government make zoning decisions. Zoning is fundamentally a choice for local elected officials, not the federal government. However, given the broader effects that housing undersupply has on the cost of housing across the country, we need to start collecting information that better tracks some of the factors contributing to the underlying problem. That's what this bill does. It's a reporting requirement that will give taxpayers, the public, and lawmakers more daylight into key barriers to home building across the country and kickstart important conversations about policy change on the ground. Finally, I'd like to add that this legislation is not new to this committee. YIMBY was marked up in the 116th Congress under then Chairwoman Waters, and it ultimately passed the House in 2020 before failing to make it across the finish line in the Senate. This committee was a champion of this legislation previously, and I hope with bipartisan support we can have this Congress finally get it across the finish line. Before I conclude, I'd like to submit an item into the record. Without objection, I'd like to submit a letter of support for this bill from a list of both housing industry and advocacy groups. Some of the co-signers on this letter are the National Apartment Association, the National Multifamily Housing Council, the National Association of Realtors, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and Habitat for Humanity International.
Without objection, so ordered.
With that, thank you, and I yield back.